Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me. I am here to talk all about really some of the latest research. I don't know if you've heard, I like research, I like strategy, I really like data. Why? Because it helps us get better. So, I do research and strategy here at GitHub. In a previous life, back in the day, I was actually writing mainframe programs. So, it feels appropriate that I'm here hanging out on the enterprise channel. Then I was a software developer. I was an engineer. I was building systems. I was supporting them. I was a sysadmin. And then I decided to go do some research. I was lead investigator on the state of DevOps reports for years. Wrote the book Accelerate. Some of you may have heard of it. A lot of that work was based on helping us understand some of the core principles, capabilities, practices, and processes to help companies of all sizes understand how we can help build and develop software for high performance so that we can really do things that are dope. So, what have I been up to lately? I just joined GitHub earlier this year. Well, we just released the State of Octoverse report last week. It was a birthday present to myself and everyone else. We took a slightly different approach this year. So, in addition to sharing with the world how GitHub has grown and changed, we also did some deep dives. So, if you go to the website, octoverse.github.com, you'll see a little button that says download 3 reports. Now, you don't have to. I was also a professor, so I'm not going to assign some homework. But you may find them really interesting because the site will walk you through some of the highlights that I love. It will also share some of the background, some of the nuance, some of the detail. Or you can watch this talk and I'll walk you through some of my favorites. So let's dig into it. We had quite a year. We have now grown to over 56 million total developers on GitHub. That's some power. When we say community, we say community. Now, we also see 72% of Fortune 50 companies are using GitHub Enterprise. Just in the last year, in the last 12 months, we see over 60 million repositories were created and 1.9 billion, with a B, contributions were added in the last year. I mean, when I say we've had quite a year, we had quite a year. But I don't know about you. We've also had quite a year. We can take a moment. We can feel that, right? And so when we were designing the research and the research questions that kind of guided our investigations, we wanted to see what this might look like, what we're feeling, what we're doing, and how it's shaped not only the activity that we see among developers, but how it might shape and inform our practices moving forward. So this is what we'll talk about today. Juggling work and play, how automation makes things better, and the patterns that we see. Working better together, and then we'll wrap up with securing our systems. So let's jump in the Wayback Machine, because again, this year feels like it's a Wayback Machine. What we did is we took an investigation across 4 time zones to see if there are some interesting patterns. These 4 time zones for development activity include the UK time zone, US Eastern time zone, US Pacific time zone, and Japan Standard time zone. Now, we selected these because we have some strong data in these so that they won't be overly influenced by any, significant standout organizations. And these time zones also had some pretty strong shelter-in-place orders. Now, the one I'm displaying here is UK time zone. There are a couple things to notice here as you take a look at this chart. That line where everything's kind of centered is R0. So if we hadn't seen any changes in activity noticeably compared to the prior year, everything could kind of be hanging along there. Here's what we take a look at. First, we worked longer. Take a look at those purple bars. As we kind of chug along up until shelter-in-place orders, we see a strong COVID effect. As we compare the time difference between our first and last Git push to the main branch in any repository that we're working in, we see a strong increase, right? People are working longer hours. Now, I will say a little bit of this is expected, right? Because once people start working from home, even before COVID, we tend to work a little bit longer hours because we lose this boundary between work and life. But we see this grows for a while until maybe people are getting used to it a little bit, right? Maybe we start adjusting. Maybe we get a little bit better at creating boundaries. Maybe we create a commute, right? Maybe we take a lap around the block to kind of separate work and home. So then our next question is, well, are we spreading out work or are we actually doing more work? That's the green line you see, is how much work are we doing? For this, we proxied it with the number of pushes that we're doing per day. So here we kind of see that kind of jog along that zero line until we initially see shelter-in-place orders go into effect, and it kind of takes a dip as we're suddenly adjusting to uncertainty and change, and so many things are happening. Kind of comes even, and then it jumps quite a bit. So it's interesting because overall, and we see this fairly consistently across the time zones, many people are both working longer hours and getting more done. Wonder how we all feel about that. I don't know about you, I feel it. So what else did we see though? We saw that people are really turning to open source. We saw contributions to open source jump initially 40% compared to last year. And then when they settle out at about 25% increase compared to the previous year. So as we're all sitting at home, what are we going to do? We're going to pick up hobbies. Some of us named a sourdough starter. Some of us played video games. Some of us turned to open source to learn, create, turn to our community. It's kind of exciting because there's so much for us to do. But then we sat back and we're like, wait, there are only so many hours a day. How are we working more and on open source more? So we took a look by day of the week. Here's what we saw. Now we are working more. These are kind of laid out by days of the week, starting with Monday. We're working as much on Saturdays and Sundays as we are on Mondays. Take from that what you will, but we're working more on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, spent in development time. We step down that work on Saturdays and Sundays, and look what happens to open source. So the bars are our work days, work hours. Open source kind of chugs along and it jumps up on the weekends. We're creating time for open source. This is a great opportunity for us to disconnect, reach out, pair with our community. I think it's important for enterprises and teams and managers and leaders to realize that open source is something else. It's something different. We should create space in our corporate cultures and in our corporate policies to make sure that we allow our developers this space. Why? Because productivity is personal, right? It does provide us this escape. Now, I've been chatting with researchers conducting dozens of experiments across and research across many, many other teams. And we do see that productivity is personal. As we saw in the previous charts, many people are spreading out their days. Flexibility is key here. And one tip we can say to anyone here, managers, developers, one of the big tips that we see resonate with many, many people is that it's important to manage your energy, not just manage your time. Some people are finding great success by focusing in the mornings or by focusing late at night. Sometimes people are finding great success from finally having flexibility in the middle of the day to work out or take a nap or kind of have that flexibility. One of the great things that we also find is that not only do we have a little more flexibility with our work times and our work schedules now that we're home, but by having great flexible tools that allow teams to collaborate across time zones, across contexts, and across geographies, leveraging things like inner source can really help. Because things like automation are really enabling this. We did an additional analysis. We found that once an open source repo starts using actions on their pull requests, we see an 18% faster time to merge that pull request and an increase of 30% more pull requests merged. Now, we chose pull request as kind of that interesting, perfect little inflection point because that means you can automate notification of asking people to take a look at that PR, or you can then kick off the rest of your development workflow. So look at the impact of automating just one aspect of your workflow. It helps reduce toil work. It helps reduce manual work, the things that are important to do, but we may not love doing. It frees up time to do the things that we love. It improves our developer experience. It kind of greases the wheels for the rest of what's great. And I think that's also important to realize is this isn't just about productivity. Yes, we see amazing productivity gains, and that's important, especially in a year like this, but it's also about making tech sustainable. And if we think back beyond March, so many Marches this year, DevOps was kind of the original hipster for building systems and making tech more sustainable. It was really about improved technology and improved process and better collaboration and better communication so that we could take care of ourselves and we could take care of our teams. And while it's true in open source, there's nowhere that it's more true than enterprise systems. So, speaking of communication and collaboration, we also saw this happen at scale. As we look, again, it's so interesting, right? We see this COVID effect appear so many places as we kind of chug along the year. By the way, that quick jump on the left is Thanksgiving holiday. We saw a shift in it across weeks. But as we take a look at PR merge times, once shelter-in-place orders occur across all open source repositories, PR merge times drop, which means they're getting faster. And they got up to 7.5 hours faster. Remember, this is a sign of collaboration. People are, maybe they're home, but we had so many things we could do from home. We were eager to reach out and work together and create and build wonderful things. But it wasn't just open source. It was also our working together, right? In our enterprise repositories. We saw this in enterprise. We saw this in paid team repos. We got up to 5.5 hours faster. We really were working together and collaborating better and collaborating faster. We really figured out how to get this done. And I think it's exciting. And not just with PRs, not just core in the code, but talking about all of the things that make our projects and our community great. GitHub released and announced discussions earlier this year. So we took a look at the next.js repository and how they were using discussions. And it was great to see and kind of exciting to see how this grew over time. And what we found is that it really helped keep this community more resilient and more sustainable. What some of our other analysis found is that some of the best ways to invite and encourage and foster newcomers to stick with the community are with issues. The challenge with issues is that can burn out maintainers. So the exciting thing is that we also found that one of the best ways to encourage newcomers is with discussions. Discussions is a way to engage, talk about what's happening, learn new norms. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, what does this have to do with me, Nicole? This is the enterprise track. This is great because as we think about scaling our solutions and scaling throughout our enterprises, think about things like centers of excellence or communities of practice. This helps make sure that our expertise isn't siloed. This helps us spread that excellence. It's a lot like inner source, right? We have so many things. We have expertise. We have process. There's so many things that we can share. Now, speaking of open source and building and sharing that expertise, we also looked at how open source is used. And across all of the package ecosystems that GitHub supports, so many of them, most of them, over 90% rely on open source. And I think that's so exciting and so wonderful because there is this amazing, amazing resource that's available to almost everyone, right? That's incredible. We also then took a look to say, to ask ourselves, what does that mean in terms of dependencies, right? Because we also need to be thinking about security. So what does this mean in terms of our security posture? What we found is that it's super important to secure our code because any piece of software can have hundreds and thousands of dependencies. And this chart here shows you both direct dependencies, if something that you directly pull in, a library or file has a dependency, or if a transitive dependency, or how many transitive dependencies it has. So if anything, in turn pulls in a file. What we found is that any piece of code or any repo has a 59% chance of getting a security alert in the next year for those active repositories with supported package ecosystems. Now, in case you're saying, wait, this means I can't use open source. That's actually not the case at all, because then our follow-on analysis asked, well, where do these vulnerabilities come from? Most vulnerabilities are mistakes. Only 17% of them are explicitly malicious, things like backdoor attacks, and they result in only 0.2% of alerts in the very commonly and most used repos and most used files. 83% of these vulnerabilities are the result of mistakes. So it's important to remember anyone can make a mistake, and anyone can insert a mistake into your code base. So by leveraging the power of community, that means that anyone in this community can help find these vulnerabilities and fix them for you. You've suddenly got a huge home team advantage. So what does this open source vulnerability timeline look like? It actually takes over 4 years, often, to find a vulnerability once it's introduced. This seems kind of long. It's actually not totally unheard of. The only analysis that we could see that was similar to this was from an O-Day analysis, which is kind of like comparing apples and oranges. But RAND ran this analysis, and it was about five years to identify vulnerability. But once that vulnerability is identified, it takes the community just over 4 weeks, almost 4.5 weeks, to fix the vulnerability. It takes about 10 weeks to identify the community, and then 1 week to fix. I will note that for people using GitHub Advisory Database, we can alert 20 times faster because we don't need to run through several steps of intermediaries and imports. Now, another benefit of automation. Repositories that automatically generated a pull request using Dependabot to fix patched their software 1.4 times faster. So many times people ask me, what does shift left look like? If I want to be doing DevSecOps, what does that look like? This is what that looks like. We can scale what it is that we find. We can build that into our development workflow. We have so many opportunities to build security in. So again, we're leveraging the wonderful things that the security community finds for us. We can build in that patch automatically, and it just happens. Now, I'm about out of time. So let me share just a few more favorites that I had in the findings. We did more work overall this year. So then we ran another analysis. How did we get more work done? Were we just creating like giant files? Turns out, no. PR size overall didn't change. This one made me personally very happy because much of my prior work shows that some of the best ways to get work done is to work in small batches. So, pro tip, keep working in small batches. It makes your releases faster and more stable, and it makes it easier to be running your PRs. Now, what else? GitHub is the home for more than just developers. In our community report, we ran an analysis that went beyond just 1 year in arrears. We went back 7 years in some cases to see how our community is changing and growing. And we found that while we are growing overall and we still have many developers, so many more people are joining the community. We see scientists, we see people in education, we see people in data, like data analysts. There's a space for so many people here. Managers, leaders, so many people are joining GitHub. And GitHub is a place not just for code, but it's a place for so many different file types. The platform itself is maturing, becoming a place for many different types of creation. We also found that the most critical vulnerabilities are caught in code review. Code review, not just for code and linting and tabs v spaces, It's also, most importantly, for security and our security vulnerabilities. Okay, listen, there's so much more there. Go check out the report. Go check out the site, octoverse.github.com. Now, here's the slide. Take a picture. You'll get credit. Even if I'm sure you've been tweeting out your favorites. Here's our TLDR. We talked about juggling work and play, how automation makes things better, working better together, and securing our systems. Thanks so much for coming.